Last Man Home, Part 4. I shoved Tom towards the walk-in freezer. I'm not stepping out of here until Dru stops shooting things, and that won't happen if you try and play hero. So stay low and let me deal with this, okay? Tom limped into the steel-walled room without further argument. Alotan physiology or not, he was hurt. He was one hurt puppy, in fact, an inexperienced kid trying to play tough the way the LT had taught him in a prisoner of war camp. And it made me angry all over again that Dru had beat up on him. Stay quiet, I warned, and I closed the door, pushing the padlock on the door into place and locking it, for all the good it would do against a bull Samadon charge. I thumbed on the phone and dialed. Gris squeaked into my ear after the first ring. "Hello?" The roof groaned under the weight of something heavy. No imagining this time, Dru was readying his charge. "Gris, I'm locked in the store," I whispered. "Dru's right on top of us. He isn't all there. He half thinks it's still the war. I need you and Teddy to help me talk him down. But stay under cover." The phone clicked, and the lights went out. I held the phone away from my ear, and in the bent square of light thrown from a barred window saw the LEDs on the face were dark. Something blocked the light out in that window, and then it was gone. I knew Dru wouldn't leave me much time to put a plan together, and got on with it. I crawled on all fours to the front room again, towards the gun case near the far end. I think better when I'm armed. His limbs were his weapons. If I wanted to be around after our little tete-a-tete, I had to open up on my friend, put him down quick. Maybe blow his limbs off from under cover. How best to incapacitate and maybe kill one of my oldest friends? Decisions. Light flickered from the barred windows at the top of the store. Then again from the side. Dru was being cautious. That was good. It meant some of his cylinders were still firing. I hoped I could still talk him out of this. I made it to the glass cabinet on the far wall behind the counter and saw what I wanted on a high shelf. 3.5-inch shotgun shells, magnum load, suitable for hunting bull elk or Samadon. Reaching up was an invitation to be amputated by laser, so I delivered 2 heavy kicks to collapse several shelves' contents in a heap at the bottom where I could get at them safely. Ignoring the shards of glass, I hauled out the first shotgun I could grab and ducked back behind the counter. I had to be about this fast. I swung the recovered shotgun by the barrel, smashing the display case again, this time sending half the boxes of ammo stored there raining down on me. Before I could swing for the rest, a lick of light set the wall on fire. The laser light touched off one round, and that set off everything left on the shelves. Sound and light filled the room, and I buried my head in my hands until the explosions petered out. "Jesus, Dru, safety that weapon!" I yelled. Amazingly, I hadn't sprung any more leaks, but my eyes and throat burned from the gunpowder smoke as I fumbled for shells. "Dru, you know where you are? You know where you are, buddy?" A few last shells popped off, and I covered my head with my hands. "Do that again, and you're sleeping on the dock tonight. I'll give Millie your bunk, I swear, you hear me?" Metal screamed up above as the skylight was ripped open. Then I heard a crash on one of the long shelves in the center of the store. Cans of food hit the ground and rolled as I stuffed in all the shells the shotgun would take and started jamming all the rest I could find in my pockets, as if I was going to have a chance to reload if this went wrong. I couldn't let myself think of what could happen if I did this right. I bit my lip, listening. No more sounds came from the floor. "Dru, you know what? You're late for the reunion again, man." It was time to go on automatic. That wasn't Dru anymore. It was just a target. Just a target. From the top shelf of the middle aisle, I heard a tentative voice call, "Sarge?" And I had my target. Things happened quick and choppy, like a silent movie. Breathe and go, Jake. Kick back with the feet. Stand and fire. Pump another round. Back to the swinging door. Fire again. Work the slide. Fire again. Ignore the heat on your face and reload and fire again. Jump through the door. Pump the shotgun. Fire as you fall. The landing took the wind out of me, and there was a roar in my left ear. I could feel the heat of a near miss I'd never even seen on the side of my face, and I started shaking. For once, I missed all the stuff they took out of me after the war. I felt slow and old. It took me almost half a minute to reload the shotgun that last time. My hands shook so bad, but nothing came through the door after me. I hauled myself up, worked my lungs for oxygen and nerve, then kicked the steel bar off the back door free, just in case I needed a quick way out. Tom was hammering on the inside of the cooler. "Master Sergeant! Jake, what's—" "Stay put, Tommy boy," I shouted hoarse through the smoke. I ignored the pain growing in my shoulder as the meds in the patches ran down, and took a quick look through the door when it swung back my way. Dru was there. He was down, and he was bleeding. I forgot all about field protocol and limped as fast as I could back to his side. He was unconscious and slick with his own blood, and I couldn't hear any signs of life in the normal places. I put my hand under his throat and just barely felt the pressure of his vocal cords rattling. It was weak and thready, but as long as it was there, he could be saved. His eyes opened, tried to focus on me, and failed. "Oh, you stupid Sammy I'd done a great job, and put 2 shells just right of center mass. "Can't think, Jake," he whispered. "Something wrong in here," he said, rolling his eyes up towards the top of his head, where Alotans kept their brains. "Shut up, Dru," I muttered. I dropped the shotgun and started searching his modified coveralls. I found something like a Bowie knife and worked it free. "I just want to do my job, Sarge." Dru sounded frightened, in a way I'd never heard from a Sammy. I felt sick. I was his friend, and I'm the one that put him on the ground? And I wasn't done yet. I knew what I had to do, and concentrated on saving him, banking some quality self-loathing to wallow in when things settled, one way or the other. "Listen, Private, you've lost a lot of blood. You know what I have to do, right?" "Jake, how did we get to Mr. Mario's store? Are the bugs on Earth?" I swore, and squeezed hard on a mangled tentacle. Dru thrashed, but his eyes opened wide and fastened on me like a drowning man. "Sarge, that hurts!" I nodded. "I know, but you gotta stay still so I can cut off some of these tentacles." He whimpered again and shook his head. "Not on the field, Sarge. I can make it back to base. Don't let the bugs see me cut up." I cursed again. He was still messed up, still living the war, and still dangerous. I could feel the tremors building in his body. Sammies were government's berserkers for a reason. Just before their end, that DNA of theirs sacrificed itself to protect others of its kind, and they were strongest right before the end. "Druid, you were right. We're in Mario's store. The war's over, and you're safe. I swear you're safe now. And you have to let me cut." Druid stared at me, wrapping a tentacle tight around my forearm. I nodded once, holding up the knife, and for a moment he was with me. He knew he had to stop the blood loss before too much of a particularly nasty hormone flooded his system. He nodded back to me, and I reached a hand down to the base of the tentacle cluster closest to me, and I began to hack. I hacked off the weapons implants first, by the book and according to enlightened self-interest, and I liked the way the salt in my eyes burned my blistered cheek as they fell. I deserved it. I hacked through the 4 biggest limbs on that cluster before he passed out, but I knew I couldn't stop. I didn't have to staunch the bleeding. It would stop on its own, so I shuffled down to his right leg cluster and kept working. I didn't know how much death hormone had been released before he'd passed out. It could be too late already, but I kept hacking to get the largest tentacles off and cut down the amount of hormone in his bloodstream. His shakes got worse, not a good sign. I didn't stop to retrieve the shotgun, though. I owed Dru every second I could give him. I ignored the muffled cries from the back room. I kept on hacking and hoped the door would hold Tom in. I was on the 4th tentacle in that cluster when he started shaking violently. I climbed on top of him to hold him steady. I moved to his lower left cluster and kept hacking. Every second counted. The cooler door exploded off its hinges and fell on its side through the swinging door, with Tom the bug on top of it. "Get out!" I snarled. I kept hacking, kept ignoring the spasms coming quicker and quicker beneath me. The bug had Tom's name, but he hadn't learned when to follow orders. "I can assist you, Jake. My claws." Dru's rattle changed to an uninterrupted white noise sound, and all his muscles flexed at once, hurling me into the air. Tom held out his claws to stop me, but Dru's throw was too strong. I felt a spike slash through my pants and into my thigh. Fire burned in my blood again. The spike had hit a vein. I fell over, losing the ability to walk in a second, and had to work hard to breathe. I remember yanking my belt out and cinching it around my upper thigh as tight as I could, and to my surprise, I didn't pass out. "The tentacles!" I gasped. The world spun again, but I'd be damned if I let it lay me out, not at a time like this. "Removing them may save him," Tom acknowledged, drawing himself up to full height. I jumped at the staccato scythe-like sound of 5 of his claws slashing open and closed, and instinctively moved further down the counter. Purple and red blotches filled my sight as I watched Tom the Bug advance on Dru, still thrashing on the ground. I forced myself up, leaning over the wreckage of a shelf Dru had thrown clear in his violent contortions. Dru whipsawed the last tentacles he had and shrieked in Samadon at us, all the way out of his head for real this time. He jerked away from Tom, then his eyes fell on me. "We'll help," I promised dumbly, but it was too late. He attacked. 3 tentacles lashed at Tom, his claws sliced through one, but the other 2 got past him and lifted Tom off the floor. Dru pulled the alien bug towards him, rearing up and opening his mouth. Now, I'd seen Sammy's bite through the heads and chew the brains right out of a bug. But this Sammy was wounded, and this Alotan caught his first break, snipping through another of the tentacles holding him. With a sound like a tidal wave crashing against rock, Dru hurled Tom over his head and against the wall. Tom was stunned. He kept his claws between himself and his attacker, snapping at anything that got close. But he wasn't a fighter. For all his might, I knew how it would end if I didn't get back in it. I crawled for the shotgun and got myself to my feet, using it as a crutch. I hoped I could see straight enough to make this work. "Clear!" I barked, and Dru fell for it. Years of training worked through the blood hormone, and he swiveled to the side to get clear of Tom, who he thought my blast would be meant for. The scatter shot I had in the shotgun took more tentacles out, and Dru roared in pain. But not enough pain. He batted another row of shells right at me and lurched out the back. I heard the door slam open, and then Tom was beside me, yanking me to my feet. "Get us back there!" I had to force the words out. I could feel my jaws and throat locking up. Dru was halfway to the trees before we got outside. I fired, missed, and then shot the ground out from under him. It was further to the trees than it was to us, and he turned to face us, gathering himself to charge. It was all wrong, and it made me sick. I flashed back to all the times the son of a squid had saved my life, and wondering what right I had to end this. I was walking wounded, a lonely suicide waiting to happen, who hadn't been farther from home than the beer taps in the Wildlife Tavern in forever, let alone off-planet. I was nothing, and I wanted it that way. I'd done everything I could not to live a meaningful life, and here I was playing judge and jury. But something crawled out of my guts and burned for the first time in years. Wouldn't you know it, I didn't want to die after all. "Goodbye, Dru," I slurred, raising the gun. He whipped at the gun. He was still meters out of range of touching, and I fired. Then nothing. The shotgun jammed. It fit my track record for me to start loving life right before it was squeezed out of me. I laughed at the irony and watched Dru wind up the tentacle that would break my neck. Then a claw grabbed me, and I was flying backwards through the air. I landed hard and struggled not to pass out. Tom reared himself up as high as he could, and that kept those Sammy teeth away from his head after he lost his battle with the tentacles. Dru pulled him in close and slammed him to the ground, biting madly. Most of his teeth bounced off exoskeleton while Tom severed a tentacle. Then 2. Then 3. Finally, Dru wedged a small tentacle against the mud-encrusted wound low on Tom's side and stabbed it. Tom started to weaken immediately, but by then I'd crawled close enough. He butted his head at me, and I grabbed it, holding for dear life to the holes he used for ears. "Soldier, look at me." A tentacle battered my side, and I felt another rib go. I sucked in another painful breath, felt my fingers scratching and bleeding against his scaly skin, and dug for the sergeant's voice. "Name and rank, private." He hit me again, and I tasted blood. Dru's eyes lost the wild animal look, though, and he recognized me. "Jake, did this mother hurt you?" I held onto his head when he tried to get a look at Tom again, and heaved for another breath. I shook my head, panic seizing me, as I lost my voice and choked on blood. "What did you call me, ground pounder?" I froze, and so did Dru. "I asked you a question, Private, and stop hugging me. I'm not your mother." The voice was high, It was wrong, but in my head the words were right. For Dru too, I guess. He rolled away from me, slumping beside Tom with his tentacles limp on the ground. He shuddered again, and I could hear his rattling, trying to rev up again. He wasn't in the clear, not by a long shot. "Shove those noodles front and center," Tom barked. "Or you'll be cleaning more toilets than the time I caught you fratting that girl, Sammy, from Baker Squadron." I remembered something about that, so that was why the ship's head had been so clean for a month. Apparently Dru remembered too. He slowed his shuddering and focused on Tom's face, confusion in his eyes. "Sir?" he asked lamely. Tom drew himself up slowly. I could see oozing cracks in his shell from where Dru had crushed him. "Present tentacles to the sergeants so he can slice them. He seems to think you're too valuable to go necrotic on death hormone." Dru peered closer at the bug, who displayed intimate knowledge about his prior punishments and sex life, then at me. And I climbed to my feet, hopping against the butt of the useless shotgun, sweating and shuddering. Dru's rattling kicked up a notch when I lurched forward. I turned to ice, my free hand raised in a placating gesture. Tom saved me again. "I told you I'd make you calamari before I'd let you dance on another soldier, Dru." He said it cold and slower, and Dru came to attention. We're gonna cut you," I panted. "You're gonna let us." Tom shook Dru again, as if on cue. "That clear, soldier?" Dru had kind of collapsed at attention. "Clear, sir," he panted. Tom and I jumped at the same second, each grappling tentacles and slicing deep and bloody. We got through 2 more before Dru passed out, and somehow Tom got us both gently down on the ground before my own world went black. I heard him cry as my blistered cheek hit the ground. I wondered if he did it because the LT always cried after action, though we all pretended we didn't see it. "Come on, you fly a lot more than I do, Gris," Teddy wailed behind me. I eased myself back into my seat and growled. Given that so much of me still hurt, I didn't really feel like putting up with them bickering all the way into orbit. "Take the aisle for once, Gris." Gris's nostrils whistled, and then I felt his briefcase thump the back of my chair as he moved himself out of the window seat behind mine. "Thanks, Gris," Teddy said, expressing gratitude with snaky sibilance. Gris kept up his silent pout, and I chuckled. Across the cabin, on the mesh length of wall where he would hang until the shuttle reached orbit, Dru looked pretty good for a multiple amputee, but he still needed help lashing himself down for the trip. Tom was strapping him in with his middle claws and slapping a couple of scrawny tentacles away from each other. "Leave it alone, do you wish them to scar?" he cajoled. "It itches, LT," Dru complained. "Not Lieutenant," Tom corrected him gently. Dru was still having a tough time keeping the new Tom, and Tom that was, straight in his head. "Just Tom, remember?" Dru nodded and fondly thumped his head against one of Tom's eye stalks. My chair bounced as Teddy's head craned down over me. "You remember how to fly, Sarge?" he teased. "Very funny, Teddy, but I think I can handle it. And watch your claws on the upholstery, huh?" I told him I could hack, but my stomach was squirming. Not about riding a ship out of the gravity well, about what came after. Bulging eyes blinked slowly down at me. "Okay in there, Sarge?" he asked again. I smiled back at Teddy. "You got guts asking that, after lining up crates of that orange stuff at the bar last night." "Not my fault you can't appreciate the finer things," he said with a flick of his long forked tongue. "Not that you gotta worry about finer things on Gallus. It's all farm food. Should make you feel at home." I swatted at him, and he crawled back off my chair in time. My lower back exploded with it, until the bouncing stopped, and I fought down the urge to reach for stim patches. The real surprise wasn't that I had survived the fun at Mario's store, but that Tom had. All thanks to a hotshot intern who'd come up with the idea of mixing concrete with casting plaster to seal up all the cracks in his shell. Tom moved stiffly towards me, and I tried not to laugh as I took in the signatures and drawings on the white patches all over his shell. I bet he was the first Alotan ever to have "Get Well Soon" scrawled on his ass. I patted his stump once he got settled into something close to comfortable in the too-small seat. We'd been careful not to bring up the claw he'd lost, until we saw him admiring it. He may have been against killing, but he was macho enough to dig the war wound. "Should I be ready with airsick bags?" I asked. He didn't have gills to turn green, but he looked, well, bugged. "You're almost as new to planet hopping as I am out of practice." He nodded. "I am fine, Jake. It's not this launch. It's—" He stopped there, but I'd figured out what was on his mind, and I was just as glad not to go into it again. Seems most of Earth wasn't ready to see a killer alien bug walking their streets, or drinking in their martini bars, thanks to Teddy and Gris. A few times now, only Teddy and Gris's fast talking had kept some very angry folks from undoing the good work of the staff of the Shawville General Hospital and the guy that picked up the concrete from Home Depot. "Listen, are you sure you want to hit Gallus right away? Maybe you want to heal up for a while on one of Gris's resorts while I send word ahead to Gallus to prepare Tom's folk," was what I was thinking. "No, Jake. I have to get there as soon as I can. It would have been my first stop, except that all of you were together for the reunion and lay in between me and his parents. And my parents." That was his first slip-up with Tom's old name and his new one. Showed just how nervous he was. Gallus had been home to Tom Callahan's folks ever since he'd passed. I was going with him now. I'd met him once on leave, and maybe with me along his parents would ask questions before shooting one of the monsters they'd blame for taking their son's life. It turns out Alotans have perfect memories. In the hospital, Tom recited conversations I'd had with Tom that was, and reverently described the LT's promise to his mother. No matter what, he'd come home. So in a way, their son was going to get to keep his promise. I think it'll help Tom's folks some to hear about Tom's last days and what he died for, from the one that was with him at the end. The cabin lights flared green. I leaned back and closed my eyes, patting Tom's stump again. "Okay then. Next stop, Gallus." "I can't believe they won't let Millie make the trip in the cabin with us. I bet nobody on board even has dog allergies." Teddy let out a belly hiss, and I tried not to laugh. It hurt too much. "That dog's practically sentient," Gris wailed. "I'm telling you, one day she'll pass her Turing test and sue me for sticking her in that crate." I felt shipboard gravity drop a touch, and Gris quieted down. Moments later, I watched the Toronto Island spaceport fall away out my window. It felt good to be in a tin can again, and on my way to somewhere. "Jake," Dru called again over the whine of the engines. "We're going to have a reunion in the cottage next year too, right?" "Not likely," Teddy squeaked behind me. I winced. I'd been skittish when I got out of the hospital. I was remembering how safe, how trouble-free my life at the cottage was. So I'd waited for everyone to pack up, filled my own bag with drafting stuff and a few days' clothes, and set fire to the place as we walked out. I remember now," Dru called out. "Nice show." Gris snorted. "I can't believe how much cash you just sent up in smoke, Sarge. Why didn't you just sell the place?" "What, to some city guy?" I shook my head. "The neighbors would have killed me." I already had some preliminary sketches for a new place, actually. It was the first time I'd drawn anything besides one of Gris's clubs since before the war. "Sure, we will stay at the lake," Tom butted in. "You are not afraid to rough it, Teddy?" he teased. "All I need is a bivy sack with that view, and I'll sleep like a baby." "Yes, sir," we all agreed, with smiles on our faces, hearing the ghost in Tom's words. I watched the sky fade to black outside my window, and felt the engines sing through the floor. I savored the way space grabbed us. The artificial gravity wobbled for a second, and I was in the black. I was likely in for a pile of trouble as long as I had Tom for a traveling companion. And that was all right with me. I knew a man once who said as long as you were in trouble, it meant you were still alive. It was good to be alive again. Thank you for listening to Last Man Home. For more stories or to buy the ebook, please visit servingworlds.com. Theme song, Alpaca Cheese, by Derek K. Miller.